Blog Talk Radio.
Mi chiamo Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit, Neye AMANSEM da Medinde Odwirafo Kwesi Nehem Ptah Akan. Akwamumai Amanuka Itipimu Odwirafo. Odwiramai mu. Greetings to all Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit people, meaning Africans, black people. Today is AMANSEM Day, Affairs of the Nation Day. My name is Odwirafo Kwesi Nehem Ptah Akan. Odwirafo of the Akwamu Nation in North America, within Odwirama, the purified nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. Yet I say we thank you once again for tuning into the broadcast. We're going to open up the chat room, and we're just making sure. It looks like there's a little problem on the Blog Talk side, so we're going to close that out and open it back up. We're going to open up the chat room as well. If you have any issues trying to log into Blog Talk, let us know, because sometimes they have a issue. It looks like there's something wrong with the console, so we're going to see what's going on with that in the meantime, and then we'll open up the chat room. But we have 4 broadcasts on a weekly basis. We have Akan for Nationalism, Ancient Authentic, Akan Ancestral Religion on Joda on Monday night. We deal specifically on that broadcast with the Akan expression of Nationalism, first and foremost because we are Akan, secondly because of the misinformation being propagated regarding ancestral religion from those not only in the Western Hemisphere, but also those on the continent of Afuraitkaitnit who have been infected with white culture, pseudo-religion, and so forth, and therefore their presentation of Akan ancestral religion, cosmology, spirituality, culture, and so forth has been infected. We deal with ancient, authentic Akan ancestral religion, which deals with our ancient ancestral inheritance, going to ancient Khanat, a title of ancient Nubia, the Khan land, ancient Nubia. We migrated from ancient Khanat after the fall of Kemet to the western part of the continent of Afuraitkaitnit. We reconfigured the civilization of Khanat, the empire of Khanat, which became the empire of Ghana a couple of thousand years ago. 1,000 years later, some of our people migrated from that region further south towards the forest belt to reestablish our Khanat civilization in the forest belt in the region of contemporary Ghana and Ivory Coast. And then hundreds of years after that, some of our people were forced into the Western Hemisphere during the Musuo Kesie, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era. And thus, this is how we ended up in North, Central, South America, the Caribbean, and Europe. We maintained our ancestral religious traditions as Akan people. Thus, in Suriname, South America, we have the Akan tradition in the form of Winti. In Jamaica, we have the Akan tradition in the form of Oboade. In North America, we have the Akan tradition in the form of Hoodoo, which is from the Akan term Undu, which means medicine from roots, trees, plant life. It also means to become heavy with the spirit through spirit possession, spirit conjuring, which is Kanche, the Akan term Kanche, and so forth. So we deal with ancient, authentic Akan ancestral religion on Joda Monday nights, clarifying concepts, clarifying cosmology, purifying that understanding. On Abinada Tuesday nights, we have Ojira, which means purification. In that broadcast, we deal with ancestral religion in general, not just the Akan expression, but wherever Afuraitkaitnit people have migrated to or were forced to migrate to in the world. We have carried our ancestral religious practices with us, and they impact every aspect of our lives. In essence, Nationalism or Afuraitkaitnit or African ancestral religion is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. That means through ritual we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual we reject those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject in order to restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions, and thus realign ourselves with divine order. So the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance, these are the expansive and contractive poles of ancestral religion. we state that Ojida, purification, operationalizes Nanason. Purification operationalizes our practice of ritually incorporating divine law and ritually restoring divine balance. It is by this means execute our divine functioning creation through the context of our ancestral culture, our way of life. Our way of life as Afuraitkaitnit people is the divine acceptance, the law, the love of order, and the divine rejection, the hatred of disorder and its purveyor. We accept that which is in harmony with divine order, and we reject that which is out of harmony with divine order. We seek to align every thought, intention, and action with divine order every moment of every day. When we make legitimate mistakes, then we engage the ritual process to ritually incorporate divine law and ritually restore divine balance. And through that means, we restore balance to our lives. And then we're able to continue executing our divine functioning creation as we align every thought, intention, and action with divine order every moment of every day. This is the means by which ancestral religion impacts every aspect of our lives. So we purify concepts, purify cosmology, purify culture, purify the understanding of these things on the Ojida broadcast, the purification broadcast. On Akwada Wednesday night, we have Egua Marketplace, where we showcase Afuraitkaitnit businesses, organizations, and institutions, those who are serving the Afuraitkaitnit community in a positive capacity, those who maintain their ancestral religious values in the context of their service to the community, which informs their service to the community. We've showcased a number of businesses, organizations, and institutions. On the broadcast, we also deal with the philosophical foundation to economic development rooted in our ancestral religious values, thus promoting a holistic approach to economic development. In that vein, we have published our Akan economic development model, which is, of course, an economic development model rooted in our ancestral religious values. So you can download that, of course, from our website for free. Tonight is Yauda, which is Thursday, also called Yada and Abada Thursday. We have AMANSEM, affairs of the nation. When we're talking about affairs of the nation, we're specifically talking about not only the Afuraitkaitnit nation, but Odwirafo, the purified nation, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. That is our designation for our people in the Western Hemisphere, the purified Ojida Oman nation, mine in the land of the West, the setting sun. These are terms from ancient Kemet, but this properly designates our people. So what we're dealing with, AMANSEM, specific issues that confront our people and our specific approach to dealing with these issues from a nationist perspective. When we talk about a nationist perspective, an Amanne perspective, we're talking about Afuraitkaitnit nationism, which is the purification of nationalism. We approach our issues based on our nature. Because we were forced into this region of the Earth Mother once we listened to and were guided by our Nananom Nsamanfo, our spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, we coalesced in a specific region of the Earth Mother's body. We blended ancestral blood circles to bring ancestresses and ancestors back through these unions. We interface with this region of the Earth Mother's body, this unique energy of this unique region of her body. We take in the plant life, animal life, mineral life within this region of her body. We interface with the unique expression of the Obosom, the Orisha, the Vodou in this region of the Earth Mother's body. That confluence of events forges within us a locative identity based on the blending of ancestral blood circles in a specific region of the Earth Mother's body, taking that energy in, which transforms our cells and our children who are born, which are returning ancestresses and ancestors who are born, carrying that energy frequency of this region of the Earth Mother's body. This forges a locative identity within our people. We have a unique expression of our ancestral religion that is born of our blood circles here. We carried our ancestral religious practices from Afuraikai to this region of the Earth Mother. When we left the continent hundreds of years ago, the manner in which we were practicing ancestral religion and culture was time-stamped in our bones and blood, fossilized in our bones and blood, and it's that expression of culture, that pristine expression that we carried here over 300 years ago. That culture is what we have passed down intergenerationally and transcarnationally ever since. So whatever happened for the next 300 years since we have left the continent, however things have been corrupted in certain areas with regard to culture and ancestral religion, we were already gone when that happened. We carried the pristine culture here and passed that down. And that is how we have manifested and maintained our traditions. Hoodoo, which is the Akan ancestral religion in North America, Juju, which is the Yoruba ancestral religion in North America, Voodoo, which is the Ewe Fon ancestral religion in North America, and so on. So we maintained our traditions. We were empowered and guided by our ancestresses and ancestors and the deities connected to our blood circles on the best means by which to wage war against the whites and their offspring and force the end of enslavement in the Western Hemisphere, engage nation-building activities and so forth, freeing ourselves from enslavement during slavery, establishing independent sovereign nations outside of the slave plantations, and then organizing for physical warfare against the whites and their offspring, as well as chemical and biological warfare, the precedent being set through root work and so forth, waging war to force the end of enslavement. So this is what we deal with when we're talking about nationism. We understand an Amanne, a nation, to be a living, breathing entity governed by specific Obosom, specific Orisha, specific Vodou. We are cells within that organal structure when we support the functions of that organ, which is an Amanne, a nation, and the deities that govern that nation. Then we operate in a harmonious fashion, and we have an approach to solving our issues that is rooted in our ancestral religious values and our proper concept of what an Amanne, a nation, actually is, a living, breathing entity that we are cells, cellular components of. Now, tonight's broadcast focuses on a specific aspect of that. If you look at the information for the show and the title, Ptah Tanen, Overcoming Ego in the Context of Amanne Nationism. Nationism, as we said, is the purification of nationalism. We have a nationist approach to resolving our issues, which is rooted in our ancestral religious values. We want to invoke the function of the Obosom, the deity Ptah, also called Ptah Tanen. He's called Oboade in Akan. He's called Obaluaye in Yoruba. He's called Dada Zoji, as well as Sakpata in Vodun. Invoke his function and his role in the regulation of properly formed thoughts, intentions, and actions. And we're going to get into this Shabaka Text dealing with that. When we have a nationist approach to resolving our issues and a nationist approach to regulating our behavior as members of OBARIMA, the purified nation, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere, our interactions with one another take on a different natural form. As we said, just like the cells within your heart or the cells within your liver or the cells within your pancreas or spleen, they have their own needs, they have their own nutrients, they have their own function. Those functions are interdependent upon one another, so they work harmoniously, but then they also recognize instinctively that they are children of a larger organ that has its own function and its own needs, and it's just like every organ and organ system is governed by specific Obosom, Orisha, Vodou, and so forth. There's an energy complex that governs that organ. And because there's an energy complex, a divinity that one or more divinities that govern that organ, male and female, the cells are operating under the governance of that energy complex. So they can't operate outside of the functioning of the divinity that governs the organ. So when we're interacting with one another as cells within the great divine body of the Supreme Being, and we're in a specific region of the Earth Mother's body in the West, and we coalesce in this region and blend ancestral blood circles and form a locative identity and form a community, we are cells within an organal structure. When we have issues, we don't just resolve issues based on intellectualism. We harmonize with the Obosom, the divinities that govern us, so that we can make the proper decisions and resolve conflicts in a normal, natural, functional way, a harmonious way. We don't approach life like the whites and their offspring, whatever feels good, whether it's lustful or malicious, we move forward and engage that process because we're only focused on what is serving our misguided desires. That's how a misguided ego is birthed, and then we see the meltdown all over the community, meltdowns all over the community because people are driven by misguided ego operating outside of the context of Amanne nationism because they have no concept of what nationism is. People talk about nationalism and a secular nationalism. In the real sense, there's no such thing as a secular nationalism. This is one of the failures of the philosophy that's been promoted by individuals who are rooted in Christianity or rooted in Islam or rooted in Judaism or rooted in atheism, trying to put forward a philosophical foundation for nation building. There are different streams of quote-unquote thought with regard to nation building. We followed the stream that's successful. When we first were forced over here, our desire is to free ourselves from physical enslavement because we shouldn't be enslaved. The only people who affected that triumphantly were those who maintained their ancestral religious practice, waged war against the whites and their offspring, freed themselves, established independent nations like in Dismal Swamp and other places all over the South, intergenerationally raising families within the freed zone, and when the whites and their offspring sought to send armies and militias into the free zones to drag the people back into enslavement, we fought wars, waged war against them, and forced them into quote-unquote peace treaties because they couldn't drag us back, for example, in Dismal Swamp or in the Gullah areas, the Gullah Wars, where the United States government sending their army to wage war against the Gullah and so forth, and not being successful in dragging them back into enslavement even over decades. So those of us who maintained our ancestral religious traditions, we freed ourselves from enslavement in our lifetimes, established independent sovereign territories in our lifetimes, and our children intergenerationally benefited from those independent sovereign territories. Those who were not engaged in that process remained on the plantation. So after enslavement, those who maintained ancestral religious traditions are those who will go out and start that black independent town movement where hundreds of towns are established by black people after enslavement, after we forced the Civil War through the Gullah Wars and so forth, as well as the Hoodoo Wars, and we forced the Civil War to come into existence, and we fought against the whites and offspring and forced the end of enslavement. Those who were grounded went to establish independent black towns, and intergenerationally, they're raising their children, their families, in independent black towns where you have other people seeking to ally themselves with the whites and their offspring and force themselves into the embrace of the whites and their offspring and begging for inclusion with the whites and their offspring and so forth. And some people get tired of that and they try to figure out a means by which to move forward and black people to free themselves. But if people are forced, operating under Christianity, Islam, Judaism, white culture, atheism, pseudo-esotericism, Masonic orders and all this kind of nonsense, they're forging a secular nationalism which is not rooted in reality and has been unsuccessful. So we don't follow the unsuccessful model. We are descendant from those who waged the Hoodoo Wars, the Gullah Wars, established independent black towns and so forth. We're coming from that blood circle, that lineage, rooted in ancestral religion. You have the quote-unquote integrationists, like Frederick Douglass and people of that ilk. Then you have the quote-unquote separatists to a certain extent, nationalists, secular nationalists, or nationalists rooted in Eurocentric philosophy. Martin Delany and other people of that ilk, Marcus Garvey and other people still trying to free our people, but still shackled by Eurocentric ideologies like Christianity, trying to blacken it up and so forth. Those are two sides of the same coin. In that sense, the integrationists and the nationalists are two sides of the same coin. They were still governed to a certain extent by Eurocentric philosophy, even though the nationalists tried to blacken up that Eurocentric philosophy, whether it was pseudo-religion or some of them just left the pseudo-religions alone and embraced atheism, which is still a white religion, and tried to blacken that up and tried to move forward based on that foundation. But it's two sides of the same coin because they have not achieved the objective of freeing our people. Integration would never do that, of course. Nationalism was more promising with regard to trying to separate from the whites and their offspring, but if you don't separate from their ideology, you're just going to recreate a hybrid of that kind of enslavement. Two sides of the same coin, which was not effective. Then you have another coin that the whites and offspring do not want us to focus on, those who are actually successful. If you're enslaved and you free yourself from enslavement and establish an independent sovereign territory, and your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren are living in that territory, and hundreds of people and eventually over 1,000 people are living in that territory, and you never are enslaved again, you achieve your objective. That's success. Then after enslavement, after you force the Civil War, the Hoodoo Wars, Gullah Wars, and forcing the Civil War to force the end of enslavement, and then you begin to establish independent black towns that you defend. We're not talking about Black Wall Street or Rosewood. We're talking about hundreds of black towns that actually survived into the so-called 20th century until the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren decided they wanted to start engaging in integration and things were getting better racially, so maybe we can integrate into white society. We don't need to live in these black towns anymore. We're going to leave the little black towns. We're going to go out into the world and, integrate with the whites, and then they saw how that worked out. Instead of building those black towns up to large metropolises, some of those black towns died out, but over the 100 years after the end of enslavement, those who fashioned those black towns and defended them, generation after generation after generation, their people are raised up in independent black towns that are run by black people. That's a measure of independence that the vast majority of our people did not enjoy. That was a success that most of our people did not enjoy. So we're following that successful model to complete the mission, and that is Nationism, Amanne, establishing an independent sovereign nation, and we're secure in our sovereignty rooted in our ancestral religious values, a holistic approach to nation building. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about nationism. We're talking about forming thoughts, intentions, and actions rooted in that proper understanding of nationism, that proper understanding of Amanne. Ptah is directly governing that process. So when you see some individuals falling into this misguided ego, that can happen personally, of course, but then when you have social media, those kind of things become viral. Even on a mundane level with social media in your common interactions with people. You can be online, you post things on your wall on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter and so forth, and then you have some ignorant Negro trying to argue with you, somebody you don't know. You shut them down, you just keep doing what you're doing, and then the fool follows you in your inbox and they're still trying to argue with you, trying to gain some attention from you. People's pathologies manifest in a poignant way in social media. Prior to social media, when people, had pathologies and so forth, there was no way to express them because everybody they came in contact with recognized that there was something wrong with the individual, if they were schizophrenic or bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 or narcissistic or whatever they are. People recognize that by interacting with them, so people shun them, family members, friends, individuals who they come in contact with, so they had no outlet for their pathology. Once social media came to prominence, and then we had people able to access social media no matter what their income level was. Once Android phones became, ubiquitous and people can get rate plans and access the internet and get on YouTube and post videos and post images of themselves and communicate with thousands of people. Someone who's mentally ill, mentally, emotionally unstable, having these various forms of pathology, now they can reach out to thousands of people. People are actually listening to them for the very first time. Some of these people have abandonment issues and everything else, but now people are actually listening to them because people don't know who they are. And they can cloak their pathology through memorizing what other people say, seeing how people receive some sensational response when people make certain statements. They memorize those statements or copy and paste, make it appear that they're intellectual and so forth, and people begin to praise them. Brother, that was deep. Sister, that was deep. And now the individual who has serious pathology are being praised for the first time, but they don't know how to handle that. So then when they come in contact with someone who actually dismisses them, The worst thing that a narcissist or someone who's bipolar or schizophrenic and so forth can have happen to them is to simply be dismissed. That notion of dismissiveness cuts them to the core because they have abandonment issues and so forth. So then they will stalk an individual, just like they would do that, if they were dismissed at a job or dismissed at a restaurant when they were trying to speak to a sister and the sister just dismissed them and walked off. And then they stalk them and try to attack them or stalk them and follow them home, and they have to get a restraining order because this clown is stalking the individual. They still engage that process online and stalk the person on their page or stalk them into their inbox and so forth. And we're going to do a whole broadcast on this whole notion of pathology manifesting, running rampant in social media and so forth. But these are the kind of things that happen, even just on a mundane level. And then you have on a larger level, Negroes having battles and so forth online on social media and waging war, all based on misguided ego, rooted in a Eurocentric mindset, sometimes cloaked in Afrocentrism or African-centeredness or cultural awareness and so forth. But the pathologies are very manifest. How do we deal with that from a nationist perspective, an Amanne perspective? And our mind and nation is governed by specific divinities. All of our functions, just like every function in your body, every organ system is governed by specific divinities. All the organs within the great divine body of the Supreme Being are the deities, the Orisha, the Vodou, the Obosom, and so forth. They govern different functions. So let's talk about, we're going to look at the Shabaka Text, which deals with the quote-unquote cosmology related specifically to Ptah, so we can get into this information. And you can find translations of the Shabaka Text, Shabaka Stone in different places. The Ensu, Per Shabaka found this particular text, this text that was quote-unquote worm-eaten, so he decreed that it was refurbished, basically quote-unquote printed or carved on a specific stone, so that it could be preserved. It was the word of the ancestresses and ancestors and so forth. And when you look at the beginning of the Shabaka Text, that's explained. It says, this writing was copied out anew by His Majesty in the house of his father, Ptah, south of his wall. For His Majesty found it to be a work of the ancestresses and ancestors, which was worm-eaten, so that it could not be understood from the beginning to end. His Majesty copied it anew, so that it became better than it had been before, in order that His name might endure and His monument last in the house of his father Ptah, south of his wall, throughout eternity, as a work done by the son of Ra, Shabaka, for his father Ptah Tanen, so that he might live forever. So he found a text, the Ensu Shabaka. This is going back to so-called around 711 BCE. So he finds this text. It's an old text and it's worm-eaten. He says, well, this is a work of the ancestors and ancestors. We need to preserve this. So we're going to put the text on a stone stela, and then it's going to survive forever. And it will be able to, inform our people today, but it will also be able to inform our people, our progeny, our posterity. Not only his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so forth will see what he did to preserve the work of the ancestors and ancestors and be wisdom. But 2,700 years later, we're reading the work. So what he wrote on this stone and said, I want to preserve this for our posterity, we're benefiting from what Shabaka did today. So first they're talking about in the text, some historical information and talking about the battle between Heru and Set and how Heru was, adjudged to be the heir to the throne of Al-Sar and so forth, and how he was adjudged to receive the, rulership of Kemet and all these different things. So that's part of the first portion, but that's not the focus that we want to focus on tonight. We did a broadcast in detail about Oboade, Ptah, and you can listen to that broadcast where we go into detail about the Shabaka Text, including that first portion. Tonight we want to focus on the cosmological portion, specifically with regard to the functioning of Ptah himself. Now, Ptah is the divine fashioner of creation. His name means to fashion. This is why in Akan, Oboade is the fashioner, that boss, to fashion, to make, and then Adie, the thing, object, entity, deed, and so forth. He's the fashioner of the thing, fashioner of the entity. And as you can imagine, Ptah becomes Ptah, Oboada, Oboade, and Akan. He's the divine fashioner. He's not creating things out of nothing. Ra and Raed are the creator and creatress, and they create out of no things or out of the black substance of space. And they create living entities out of nothing. And of course, Kepra and Kepri bring those things into being, but then once those entities are brought into being and given life and so forth, it is Ptah who fashions the form of that divine living energy brought into being by Ra and Raed, fashions the form into specific, fashions the divine living entity into specific form according to a specific objective. He gives that blueprint. So, for example, every form has its own function. Every specific geometric form carries a specific energy configuration. You can even see that on a mundane level. When you have, say you have a wire with some current running through the wire, so the current is just running through the wire. If you take the wire and form it into a series of circles, wrapping it around in a series of circles, now the electromagnetic energy is moving straight through the wire, but then it starts whipping around in the form of those circles, and it's circling through that form that you just created. And as this electromagnetic energy is circling, it generates a field, an electromagnetic field. So if you wrap that wire around the nail, for example, and sense the current through, once it circles the nail, it generates an electromagnetic field, and then it magnetizes the nail. And now the nail becomes a magnet, and now it can pick up paper clips and things like that. When the energy is projected through a specific geometric form, it generates a field of energy, an electromagnetic field. If it's a circle, it's a certain configuration of energy. If it's a triangle, it's a different configuration of energy, and the emanations are slightly different. If it's an octagon, the emanation of energy from that matrix is slightly different. If it's some combination of these various forms, then the energy emanating from those specific geometric configurations are according to their form, according to their nature. And the divine life force energy is circulating through you. Nobody has your specific form, your physical form, but also your spirit body's form. So the configuration of energy that moves through you, through your form, is a unique configuration that nobody else has. As it emanates from you, there's a collection of sound vibrations that's unique to your specific form. It's like if you blow into an instrument, it's the same air that's coming from your lungs, but if you blow through a trombone, blow through a trumpet, blow through a tuba, because the brass instrument is formed differently, the air coming through you will generate a specific kind of sound that's different coming from the tuba, different coming from the trumpet, different coming from the a trombone and so forth. Based on the form, the energy moving through will generate different sounds. Based on your form, plant life, animal life, mineral life, Afurakani, human life, and our spirit body's form, when the divine living energy of Ra and Ra moves through those forms, they generate a specific configuration of sound vibrations. And once those are attuned to with the spiritual ear, you can replicate those sound vibrations, and that's the actual true name constantly emanating from the individual. And of course, when we're talking about human beings, we're talking about Afurakani human beings only, because Ra and Ra do not communicate with nor operate through the whites and offspring spirits of disorder. So it's important to note that any geometric form, once energy is invested in that form, what emanates from that geometric form is a matrix of energy that's unique to that form. And once that energy is constantly moving through that geometric form, it generates an electromagnetic field. Just like energy moving through your body, you can feel on a mundane level the heat emanating from your body. You have an electromagnetic field, a magnetosphere. The planet Earth, of course, has a magnetosphere. All the planets have a magnetosphere. They are geometric forms. Fundamentally, they have a magnetosphere. The suns, stars, moons, everything has a magnetosphere. What's very important is Ptah not only fashions physical forms, he's the divine fashioner. So he fashions spirit forms as well, the life force energy of Ra and Ra'at, even before it takes on physical matter. The spiritual forms or matrices are fashioned by Ptah. That includes your thought forms. Ptah operates, his seat is in the physical brain. And they talk about Ptah and his sanctuary being Anebu Hech, or the white walls, and that's the sanctuary, the center of government in ancient Kemet. The white walls in your body are the left and right hemisphere of the cerebral cortex, and Ptah is in the brain. This is why he wears the skull cap and so forth, where the hypothalamus area is, and the white walls are the sanctuary of Ptah. He wears that skull cap. He's seated right there, and he's fashioning thought forms. He's also fashioning the blueprint of everything that needs to be happening within your body. That blueprint is in the brain, of course. But he's fashioning thought forms just like he's at the innermost core of earth, fashioning in his workshop. That's why he's mummified and so forth. He's deep within that workshop, fashioning forms and so forth. They say he's the master craftsman. He's always fashioning deep within the center of earth. Of course, his wife is Sekhmet, and she's that fiery divinity fashioning within the marrow of the bones and so forth. They are deep within. So, fashioning those forms in creation, but then within your body, the shrine of Ptah within your body, apex is in the brain area, and he's fashioning forms within the Anebu Hech, the white walls, the center of government, and so forth. And of course, the White House in America is the center of government in ancient Kemet. Min-Nefer, the beautiful stable place, was a sanctuary for Ptah. It was the White Chapel of Ptah, sacred ceremonial center for Ptah. This is where they get the whole notion of the White House being the center of government and so forth. That goes back to the Anebu Hech, the white walls of Ptah, and they talk about in this text Ptah, south of his walls and all of that. So he's not only fashioning the world, fashioning the forms, the energy of Ra and Ra'at, fashioning them into planets, fashioning that energy into stars, fashioning that energy into plant life, animal life, mineral life in their specific forms, but he's also fashioning your thought forms. When you're asleep, you close your eyes, you're in a dark room, there are no sounds, no movement, but then you're experiencing form, spiritual matrices, luminous forms, non-physical forms. You're experiencing, you're seeing colors, shapes, movements, entities. What faculty, what forces fashioning those specific forms within your spirit that if somebody walked into the room, they couldn't see? These immaterial forms, why do they have that shape? Why do they have those forms? Ptah is fashioning those forms. Your thought forms, just like a physical form, just like a planet, or just like a stone has a magnetosphere, or your physical body has its own electromagnetic field, a magnetosphere, your thought forms have a magnetosphere. So when Ptah fashions specific thought forms coming from your ka, your soul, your divine consciousness, dwelling in the head region of what you should be doing, your ka directs you what you should be doing, what function should you be executing in the creation, how you should be operating, what kind of thoughts, intentions, and actions should you be engaged in. That's given by your soul, your ka, that's dwelling in the head region. Ptah takes the direction from the ka, the soul, or ka'et, and he fashions thought forms that conform to the direction from the ka, the soul, that divine consciousness. Now you have properly structured thoughts, forms. Because those thought forms have been fashioned and they are an entity, an energetic matrix, they generate an electromagnetic field. And that electromagnetic field affects your heart. And your heart is pumping and it has a desire. You generate the desire within the heart to adhere to the thought forms generated within the brain. So your ka, your soul, your divine consciousness, which dwells in the head region, directs you, hey, you need to execute this specific function. You're a healer, a healeress. You have thought forms that are generated by Ptah based on that direction, based on those specifications. And you have certain thoughts about, okay, I'm going to heal like this, I'm going to pick this plant, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to interface with people in this way, I'm not going to act this way, I'm going to act this way, I'm not going to respond this way, I'm going to respond in a way that's reflective of divine order. These kinds of thought forms are formed by Ptah according to the specifications of the deity that governs your head. Your Ka is governed by a specific divinity. Like some people's Ka or Ka is governed by Al-Sar, some people's Ka is governed by Al-Set, some people's Ka is governed by, Heru-Bedeti, some people's Ka is governed by Sekhmet, whoever it is. But whatever your Ka is directing you to do, that deity dwelling in the head region, Ptah responds by fashioning forms that conform to the directives coming from the soul, coming from that divinity. And those are the proper kinds of thought forms that dwell within your head. They're coming from divinity, exactly what you should be doing. They generate an electromagnetic field, a magnetosphere of their own. And because they generate a magnetosphere of their own, they have that capacity to draw things into their orbit, just like the sun is so powerful. It has its own magnetosphere, but it draws the planets into its orbit because it has such substance and such weight. Anything that has a magnetic field can draw something into its orbit if the thing is close enough. A large magnet has a magnetic field. If you get some paper clips close enough, they'll jump to the magnet. The planets are close enough, they're drawn to the sun, the Atanit. When you have thought forms fashioned within your spirit's brain, within your head region by Ptah, according to the dictates of the deity dwelling in the head region, the Ka, the soul, he fashions those harmonious thought forms that you see and you feel and you understand, and you're like, okay, this is what I need to do. Those thought forms themselves, those luminous images that are within your consciousness, they have a magnetic field as well because they are forms. They have a magnetic field. They have a quote-unquote field that draws energy into their orbit. That affects your heart. And then your heart has the desire to adhere to what those thought forms are asking for. And you generate blood and pump energy and, so forth within your body, and then you move forward to execute what's in those thought forms that were fashioned by Ptah. Now, you could neglect Ptah and adhere to somebody else's thought forms. They plant something in your head, plant a desire in your head, plant an idea in your head, and you're like, okay, I'm going to go along with that. And then you import these foolish ideas and these foolish thought forms into your consciousness, and you neglect what Ptah is fashioned. Now you have foolish thought forms circulating and floating within your head, and they have their own magnetosphere, and they draw your heart into the orbit, and now you have a desire to fulfill and execute the foolish ideas of the foolish thought forms. Then you engage in foolish behavior, and it becomes self-destructive, and it creates a great deal of disorder within yourself, within your life, within the larger Afuraitkaitnit society. So this is what's taking place when they're talking about this with regard to Ptah in this text. So that's the breakdown. So let's see what they say in the text and see how it's directly related to how we should be fashioning thought forms, which affects our behavior, which affects our interaction with one another. When we have a proper understanding of how these thought forms are fashioned by the divinity Ptah, then when we get out of harmony with order, we invoke Ptah to get back in harmony with order. And then our thoughts, intentions, and actions become harmonious instead of self-destructive and misguided, ego-driven, disastrous results. But when you follow Ptah, fashioning those forms, then you realign with those properly structured thoughts, intentions, and actions. Then you engage in behavior that's reflective of properly structured thoughts, intentions, and actions based on the divinity who fashioned them. And now you have interactions with one another, Afurakani people that are harmonious, that are furthering of nation building. And when you have disputes, you resolve them based on harmony, whether you resolve the issue or you just dismiss or separate yourself from or eradicate the enemy who was causing the problem. Now, so that's the key to nationism. That's its relation to nationism. In this text, Shabaka Text, in this section, it says, there took shape in the heart, there took shape in the tongue, the form of Akan. For the very great one is Ptah, who gave life to all of the deities and their Kas and Kayets through his heart and through his tongue, in which Heru had taken shape in the heart of Ptah, in which Tehuti had taken shape as the tongue of Ptah. Thus heart and tongue rule over all the limbs in accordance with the teaching that it, the heart, is in every body, and it, the tongue, is in every mouth of all deities, all men and women, talking about Afurakani, men and women, all cattle, all creeping things, whatever lives, thinking whatever it or he wishes, and commanding whatever it or he wishes. His or Ptah's company of divinities, they miss the Jesu, but they say the Ennead is before him as teeth and lips. So before we get into that portion, so you have Ptah the fashioner, operating through the brain and so forth, fashioning thought forms, just like he's at the inner core of earth and so forth. The outer core represents the heart within earth. The inner core is where the brain is. So when someone, for example, is, when you're conceived and become a zygote, later becoming an embryo, first you're just circular form. Before you become stretched out, it's a circular form similar to the earth with its core and inner core and inner core and so forth. The inner core is Ptah. That outer core is Heru, where the heart is and so forth. So there's a heart and the brain working together. So when you talk about the heart and the tongue ruling over all the limbs, Ptah is in the inner core. That outer core is Heru. Heart and tongue rules over all the limbs in accordance with the teaching that it, the heart, is in every body and the tongue is in every mouth. And then they talk about the heart is Heru, and then the tongue is Tehuti, the divinity of divine wisdom. So Ptah fashions thought forms. Thought forms generate a field, a magnetosphere that has an orbit. And that magnetosphere, that field, reaches the heart, and it stimulates the heart, within which Heru operates. And then he generates that desire to fulfill what's in the brain, what's in the thought form. And then he generates the energy through the heart pumping and sending energy out to all the cells of the body. The blood carries the energy, the oxygen, and the oxygen carries the life force energy of Ra and Ra'at. So the heart is regulating the flow of blood. Of course, it's regulating the flow of oxygen to all the cells, regulating the flow of divine living energy of Ra and Ra'at to all of the cells. This is how Heru, the king, sitting in the middle in the heart section, he's carrying the energy of Ra, the creator, and Ra'at, the creatress, to all the cells in the body. He's regulating the flow of divine energy to all cells in the body. He starts pumping heavy to generate that energy, that fire, so that he can execute what has been encoded within the thought forms fashioned by Ptah. So what's coming from Ptah, it stimulates the heart, generates that energy to make it happen, and then it is spoken or enunciated through the tongue, which is the spokesperson, which is the Hudi, the divine wisdom. So it says the heart and tongue rules over all the limbs in accordance with the teaching that if the heart is in every body, the tongue is in every mouth of all, deities, all Afurakani, human beings, and so forth. His Ennead, or Ptah's Ennead collection of divinities, is before him as teeth and lips. They are the seminal fluid and the hand of Atem. Talking the hand of Atem is the goddess SASETEM, the hand of the god, the wife of Atem. So they're talking about the seminal fluid that carries the procreative force of the masculine, and the hand of Atem, and her sacred symbol is the vulva, which leads to, of course, the birth canal and so forth, the union of the female principle and the male principle through Atem and SASETEM. They talk about the Ennead of Atem came into being, but the Ennead is the teeth and lips in this mouth which pronounce the name of everything, from which Shu and Tefnu came forth and gave birth to the Ennead. Sight, hearing, breathing, they report to the heart, and it makes every understanding come forth. As to the tongue, it repeats what the heart has devised. So the tongue repeats what's generated in the heart. So first, Ptah receives the direction from the Supreme Being of what should happen. Ra and Ra give the divine living energy. Ptah receives that divine living energy, and he begins to fashion the forms, the thought forms of what should take place for this person. Now the thought forms are dwelling in the head of the individual. Those thought forms are so powerful. They have such a magnetic force, a magnetosphere, that they stimulate the energy of the heart. The heart begins to pump and generate energy to empower the individual to fulfill the direction and the directives that are in those thought forms. And once that energy is generated, what the person is going to engage in is enunciated through the tongue, through the divine wisdom faculty governed by Tahuti and so forth. And people, they can convey what they're about to do to the community to show them this is what we're engaging in, this is why we're engaging in it, this is why it's harmonious, this is why we're doing what we're doing, this is the wisdom behind it and so forth, so people understand what's being done, why it's being done, how it's beneficial to the community, and all of that. It's all laid out. The protocols are established, and they're enunciated so people can respect the process by which these behaviors came into being that furthers the clan, but at the same time, they can replicate those activities within themselves because they see the benefit of that. When they talk about the Ennead of Atem, or the collection of deities, the company of divinities of Atem are the teeth and lips, the energy surging from the heart and lung complex, which is in the text, it's not just saying the ab or the heart, it's saying the hati, which is the heart-lung complex together. So Heru is sitting right in the midst in the heart, and we show in our publications that the lungs are connected to Wachet and Nekabet, and you see Wachet and Nekabet on both sides of Heru and so forth, just like you see Shango and, Oya and Oba and Akan, you see Yao and Ya and Abba. In Vodun, you see Hebioso and Avejida and Ayaba, that collection of divinities sitting in the heart-lung complex and so forth. Once that energy is generated in the heart and the blood is purified through the lungs, the oxygen was in the lungs, and that's sent up through the trachea, and the air moves through the trachea, moves through the mouth, and the tongue regulates the flow of air. So if you would say ah, and then you move your tongue and say ah, and move the tongue up towards the roof, ah becomes an. So the tongue is regulating the flow of air, and it also changes the sound vibrations that emanate forward. So when the tongue enunciates what's in the heart, the movement of the tongue regulates the air, it regulates the sound vibrations, it regulates the energy moving forward. So when they talk about the heart and the tongue working together, the heart and lung complex sending that energy, generating the energy first, and moving it through the trachea. Once that air is moving and the life force energy of Ron Wright is in the air, it's regulated by the movement of the tongue, and it gives further nuance to the divine living energy moving through the heart and lung complex, including the trachea. And then the teeth and lips of Atem further define that movement. So the tongue regulates the flow of air and further defines it, but then the teeth and lips gives it specificity. And then what emerges from the teeth and lips is the fully defined directive. It started in the brain, the sanctuary Ptah, stimulated through the heart and lung complex, enunciated by the regulation of that energy through the tongue, and fully formed in specificity by the teeth and lips. That happens in the body. We show that happens in the court of the Akan, king and queen mother and so forth. That happens in creation. That whole structure is replicated in the physical world, in your physical body, in your spirit body, in creation. But it's all regulated by Ptah. So this is a process that takes place when you're about to make decisions about how you're going to communicate. How you're going to communicate with one another as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. How you're going to fashion thought forms, how you're going to fashion behaviors, which are going to lead to the kind of building in the community that needs to be, things that need to be built. How you're going to resolve disputes, how you're going to mitigate disputes based on, ancestral religious values, or are you going to allow somebody else's thoughts to invade your mind space, your brain space? You're going to put the properly formed thoughts of Ptah to the side, and to whatever silly conditioning that we receive by watching television, listening to radio, watching movies, and reading, things on the internet, going to sleep, and those things are formulating in our minds and so forth, and we're being conditioned in foolish beliefs and foolish ideas and pseudo-religions and pseudo-philosophies and so forth, and we generate these foolish thought forms about, well, maybe we should operate like this, or maybe we should do this, or maybe we should build these kinds of things, or maybe we should have interrelations with our enemies, the whites and their offspring, or maybe we should engage in insane behavior like bisexuality, or maybe we should form alliances with self-destructive individuals and overlook their, pathologies, and maybe we should do this, and maybe we should do that. All these foolish thought forms generated in your mindset, they have a magnetosphere. It generates, affects, the heart, draws the heart into its orbit. Now you're affecting your energetic output through the heart, and you start generating the kind of energy from the heart and lung complex, the energy itself, and fanning the flames of that energy through the lung complex to begin to fulfill the foolish ideas that you're maintaining in your mind space. And then you enunciate those foolish ideas, and you articulate those foolish ideas, and you promote them in the community. And then you're in conflict with somebody else who's engaged in foolish ideas, or you may be in conflict with somebody who's actually has properly structured thoughts, behaviors, intentions and actions and behaviors and so forth, and there's a conflict. We need to get back to our ancestral religious practices. When we get out of alignment with order and we see things are disintegrating and there's a problem, the first thing we do is go back to the divinity that governs our divine function and creation, which is our Ka, or Ka'et, our Okra, the deity that governs our head region, and that deity will stimulate Ptah within us to fashion properly structured forms. So we stimulate our own Ka'et, and we invoke the divinity Ptah, and he begins to fashion the kind of thought forms that we should be embracing. And then we realign ourselves with that, and realign our hearts with that, and our tongues with that, and our teeth and lips with that, and then we, move forward and make proper decisions. This is why it says sight, hearing, breathing, they report to the heart, and it makes every understanding come forth. As to the tongue, it repeats what the heart has devised. Thus all the deities were born, and the Iniet, or the Posjetu of Ptah, was completed. For every word of the divinity came about through what the heart devised and the tongue commanded. Thus all the faculties were made, and all the qualities determined that they that make all foods and all provisions through his word, to him who does what is loved, to him who does what is hated. And then when you go to thus life is given to the peaceful and death is given to the criminal. And then when you look at if you look at a specific, the actual translation, for example, on ma'at.sophiatopia.org, and Sophia is spelled Sofia, topia.org, ma'at.sophiatopia.org. They not only have a translation of the Shabaka text, but they have the actual Medutu that you can see for yourself. And that way you can see what's being shown. For example, when they talk about the heart, only in certain instances they're talking about the ab itself, the heart itself, but in other instances they're talking about the hati, which is the heart and lung complex, which is key. But also when you look down to the other portion, and it says the sight of the eyes, the hearing of the ears, and the breathing of air through the nose, they transmit to the heart, which brings forth every decision. Indeed, the tongue thence repeats what is in front of the heart. Thus was given birth to all of the divinities. Ptah's company of the deities was completed. Every word of the divinity came into being through the thoughts in the heart and command by the tongue. Thus all witnessing faculties were made, and qualities, all qualities determined. They that make all foods and all provisions through his word. Justice is done to him who does what is loved, and punishment to him who does what is hated. Thus life is given to the peaceful, and death is given to the criminal. When they say life is given to the peaceful, they're not just talking about peaceful. What it says is hetep or hetepet. They're talking about those who are in equilibrium. That doesn't mean peace in the sense of people being quiet and docile. It means hetep is talking about balance and equilibrium, balancing your thoughts, intentions, and actions. And of course, that's talking about peace, meaning not just being quiet and soft, but peace meaning you have quote-unquote peace or having balance, meaning you're not controlled or pulled by lust or misguided desire. You're not controlled by that kind of tension. You have equilibrium. That's a better term so you can understand what they mean. So it's not just talking about peaceful. So instead of saying, thus life is given to the peaceful and death is given to the criminal, you can say, thus life is given to the equilibrated, the balanced, and death is given to the criminal. So when we're talking about divine order, divine law, love, and divine hate, the expansive and contractive poles of divine order, life is given to those who are equilibrated, the life force energy is equilibrated and balanced. Death is given to the criminal. Justice is done to him who does what is loved. Punishment is given to him who does what is hated. What is that punishment? That punishment in the next line is death is given to the criminal. Death is given to one who is hated. Of course, that's outside of our community, the whites and their offspring, spirits of disorder, but also those criminals within our community who would otherwise take us down because they have become cancerous, just like the whites and their offspring. So within the text, talking about the fashioning of proper thought forms, behaviors, and so forth, it leads to the purpose of our existence. Why are we operating? What are we moving towards? We have a specific function executing creation. Ptah is directly related to how we execute that function because he deals with the specifications of our form and how we are to operate, why we're in the world, and what kind of behaviors we need to engage in and so forth, and constantly fashioning thought forms throughout the course of our lives while we're awakened as well as when we're asleep, fashioning those thought forms, fashioning those matrices that generate that electromagnetic field that draws the heart into its orbit, the desire into its orbit, so that desire is properly structured. You have a desire only to support and fulfill what the thought forms of the Ptah have given, and then you generate the energy to do that. You enunciate that, you articulate that, and you move forward and engage that process, and that includes conflict resolution. This is accomplished. We talk about it because we're, explaining it in detail. It's like if somebody walks across the room, you experience that. If you walk across the room and stand up or sit down and you're balanced, you experience that. If you had something in your system poisonous and you became imbalanced and began to fall over in something, you experience that. And if somebody said explain it, you would have to go into a great deal of detail talking about the musculoskeletal system and the nervous system and hormonal secretions and everything else to explain what's actually happening about why the person can get up, stand, walk, sit, balance themselves, and everything else. But the key is the experience because you're experiencing these things. So we can talk about these details so we have a better understanding of what's happening, but the key is the experience. Find yourself out of alignment, then you go and invoke your own ka, your own ka'et, ritually, and that leads to that invocation of Ptah to find out what kind of properly structured thought forms you have been avoiding and how to realign with that and realign your ab and your hati, your heart and your heart-lung complex with that, and realign your capacity to enunciate what Ptah has fashioned and to articulate what you're enunciating so that you can engage in the proper kinds of thoughts, intentions, and actions that are beneficial for the Amanne, that are reflective of divine order, that support the functions of the Amanne, that are in alignment with the deities that govern, our Amanne, our nation. So you have to engage in the ritual practice to invoke Ptah, the ritual practice to invoke the divinity that governs your crowd, but that is directly related to invoking Ptah, Oboade, Obaluae, Sakpata, and so forth. This is how we achieve this balance. We go to the shrine, we engage this process, we come out with a purified understanding. We begin to repel those negative thought forms. We can properly identify them. When you engage in ritual work, those negative thought forms, the conditioned thought forms, the foolishly structured thought forms that have entered into your consciousness and are dwelling there and generating an electromagnetic field and are pulling on your heart and your desire to serve them and make them a reality. When you go to the shrine, which is a magnifier of the energy of the Obosom, the Orisha, the Vodou, and so forth, as well as the Nanonoman, Samafo, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, the Egungun, Kubito, and so forth. When you go to the shrine and that energy is magnified, it allows you and assists you to repel the foolish thought forms, the disordered thought forms, and then you can fully embrace the properly structured energetic forms that Ptah is fashioned within you. And then you can realign with that. Then you can realign your desire coming from the heart to fulfill that. Everything after that. So it's based on ritual practice. We just examine these things in detail, and the texts show in detail what's happening because they lay it out. But it's not enough to read the text and study the nature of the deities and be able to repeat, the nature of these deities and what their names are and what their relationships are and how they're related to the body, how they're related to creation and animal life and totems and all. That's meaningless if you do not engage the ritual process and invoke this deity by name and actually repel negative thought forms on a consistent basis and realign with properly structured thought forms on a consistent basis. And people who engage that process, you can see that in their behavior consistently, not over the course of a week or a month, but over the course of years, and even intergenerationally, but even before that, over the course of years. The way they interact, the way they, build and operate and so forth, what institutions they're building, how they're positively affecting the community. And what's key is when conflict arises, how do they respond to conflict? Do they self-destruct? Do they melt down? Do they degenerate into foolish, conditioned thought forms and behaviors? Because then it reveals itself that some of the other work that they may have been doing was never really real in the first place. They were just imitating someone else to put on the front that they were, mature and so forth. But once conflict arises, that generates that, what's really happening within the person. What's under the surface comes to the fore. When you plant a seed and it germinates and the roots go down deep and then eventually sprouts begin to rise and they break through the surface of the earth, what manifests above the surface at sprouting time is a revelation of what was taking place within the earth. If it was a seed that was corrupt, then that flower that comes out that's corrupt is a manifestation of what was germinating and rooting prior to the sprouting. If you have foolish thoughts, intentions, behaviors, conditionings that are deeply rooted because you've allowed them to germinate, then when it's time to break through the surface of something, when there's some conflict and you have to break through a barrier, what's going to break through is what's really been under the surface all along. So above the surface, you were pretending to be some elder or, wise individual or intelligent individual or harmonious individual or balanced individual. But then you run into conflict or a barrier that you have to break through, you have to sprout through and so forth. Whatever sprouts up is what was really under the surface all along. And we see that on a regular basis. Just like we talked about earlier when you see some people talking a great deal about intellectualism or spirituality and things like this. But then as soon as there's a conflict, they start stalking somebody in their inbox and calling women, derogatory names and attacking them just like a stalker, speaking very nicely to a woman and asking her what your name is or are you available and so forth. If the woman dismisses them, whether she dismisses them in a nice way or dismisses them in a derogatory way, then they flip and all of that respect is gone, and then they start attacking them, calling them the B word, or even physically trying to assault them. An intelligent individual, if they tried to speak to a woman and they got dismissed, whether they got dismissed in a harmonious or nice way, or if they got dismissed in a derogatory way, the intelligent individual, when they see they were dismissed, then that means good. And that's not the person I need to waste my time focusing on. Any moment I'm wasting trying to focus on this individual, I'm taking away from the individual I should be actually pursuing. So obviously I went in the wrong direction. So it's no problem. You're glad. If they dismiss you in a derogatory way, that's even better, because that shows you up front that this is the kind of individual you almost made a mistake trying to embrace. You should be elated that they dismissed you in a derogatory way. But an insane individual is angry, and then they want to lash out and attack. So it's the same, and that's just an example. The pathology begins to show. So we have a lot of Negroes out here who they're emotionally unstable. They take on new personas in social media. They do that in the physical world as well, just, in everyday life, mundane life, but it's very easy to take on a new persona on social media. You get a new name, you can take certain kinds of pictures, you can dress up like you see the other people dressing up, you can say things that you can copy and paste statements and quotes and so forth, and you can memorize them or listen to a bunch of YouTube videos and memorize, just like you memorize songs and hooks and lines. You can memorize, certain lines and hooks that people clap for and cheer for when some scholar says this is something like that. And you can line all of those up and you become an actor or an actress. But then once there's a conflict, then all of that disintegrates rather rapidly, and what was germinating and rooted all along manifests, and you see the pathology of the individual. The key is nationism. The key is an approach to nation building or interfacing with one another based on our ancestral religious values, not some foolish secular nationalism rooted in atheism that has no moral or ethical foundation, or some manufactured set of rules that people are not adhered to. When we have a set of quote-unquote rules or an ethical or moral foundation in nationism, Amanne, is because it's rooted in our relationship with the forces in nature that govern creation. So our interaction with one another based on a harmonious ideal is a religious conviction. It's not just someone agreeing to a set of rules. It's a religious conviction where we tie our spirit, bodies, and our energy to supporting this ideal ritually. So that's a totally different approach to nation building, nationism, and interfacing with one another in this Oman, in this nation. And we're dealing specifically with, of course, Odwirafo, the purified nation, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere, but the Afuraitkaitnit African Black Oman nation worldwide as well. So this is our approach. It's rooted in our philosophical foundations, which is animated by ancestral religious practice. And with us in the Western Hemisphere, those ancestral religious practices that we've inherited through our spirit genetic blood circles that we've maintained for hundreds of years, unbroken. We're not dependent on anyone outside of our direct ancestral blood circle for our ancestral religion. So our hoodoo tradition, juju, grigri, voodoo, wanga, these different traditions that we've maintained for hundreds of years, and the priesthoods and priestesses that we've maintained in these traditions, hoodoo men, hoodoo women, juju women, wanga women, voodoo men, voodoo women, and so forth, Gullah-Geechee men and women, we've maintained our traditions intact. And that includes our communication with Ptah, Oboade, Oboade, Sapata, and so forth, and all of the Obosom, Marisha, Vodou, and of course our spiritually cultivated Nananom, Unsamafo ancestresses and ancestors, Egungun, Kuvito, and so forth. We maintain these traditions. This is the origin of our moral and ethical foundation here in North America. We didn't become moral and ethical because we joined the church, or we joined the Nation of Islam, or we joined some other foolish organization. We had that moral, ethical ideal, that foundation rooted in our ancestral religious practices, rooted in us aligning with the forces in nature that regulate order in creation. And when you get possessed by them, and they move through your body and move through the community, then you can replicate the order that they engender in creation consistently. You can replicate that order in your community. You can replicate that order in your body, in your mind, in your family, in your community. That's the foundation of the moral foundation of Amanne, nation building, and so forth. So that's what we wanted to address tonight in this particular broadcast. The AMANSEM, Affairs of the Nation broadcast is a little bit, we normally have that one. Our other broadcasts are 2 hours. The AMANSEM show is typically an hour. So if you have any questions or comments, of course, you can hit the number 1 on the phone line. If you have any questions or comments while people are doing that, we should also mention, so yesterday, we mentioned this on the broadcast yesterday. Yesterday we updated our page for our AKYISAN Ancestral Religious Reversion Conference. It's the 3rd annual conference coming up in March. We changed the date. Initially it was March 18th. Now the date is the weekend of March 24th and 25th. That Saturday and Sunday, we're going to make that determination if it's going to be the whole 2-day event or if it's just going to be the 1-day event, but it will be that weekend, the 24th and 25th, so you can block off that weekend. We also posted the information. So we changed that information to update it. We changed it on our pages. We changed it on the video as well because we did a trailer for that. We updated that trailer as well. That's just the first trailer. We will have another trailer coming out. We updated the information. One of our presenters is confirmed. We have a couple of other presenters we will include as well, so keep checking the page. But Voodoo Queen Kalinda Laveau out of New Orleans will be presenting on voodoo, ancestral voodoo in North America prior to the Haitian migration. Voodoo was already in North America. I'll be presenting on the Hoodoo tradition, Akan, ancestral religion in North America. We have a couple of other presenters that we will be confirming, so keep checking that page. Of course, the conference is free and open to Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people only. As with all of our conferences, it's free. We will be giving away a free copy of our book, which will be published on that weekend, as we do with all of our conferences and events. They're always free, and we give away a free copy of the book. If you would like, we have vending space. We have 12 spaces. So first come, first serve, of course. We provide a 6-foot table and 2 chairs. The vending space is $30 for the entire day. And, of course, the vendors will be, we always have vendors who are promoting their natural products and books or soap and hair care products and clothing and artwork and various different things that our people are doing that serve the community. Of course, we will have the vegan food vendor there as well. If you like to vend, go to the AKYISAN page, first come, first serve. Also, if you would like to advertise your business, organization, or institution in our journal, then you'll see that information on the page as well. We need to get your JPEG files in. You need to email those to us as soon as possible. So go to the AKYISAN page. You can place your business. You can do a $25 ad for a 1/4 page, or $35 for a half page, or $50 for the full page. Of course, they're all in color, 8.5 by 11 size, and it will be a free download on our website permanently, the book, as well as the softcover version we sell. So, as we said yesterday, we've had over 2.7 million hits on our website over the past 12 months. So people going to our site, they download the books. With the books alone, we have over 100 articles. We have a number of things on the website, but then we have our 29 books as well. We've had over 55,000 downloads of the free ebook versions of our books over the past 12 months. So when we place that AKYISAN book out there, and your ad for your business will be there, thousands of people, we have about 4,000 downloads a month of our 29 books. So people are downloading the AKYISAN books on a regular basis. They will see your ad. So one $25 advertisement for your business will be in the book from now on. And people will see it, and it will constantly replenish itself. So if you like to advertise your business, you can do that. If you like to vend, you can do that. You can also just see the information for the conference and, register for the conference. Of course, it's open to Afuraitkaitnit people only. No white Hispanics, no white Latinos, no white Europeans, no white pseudo-Native Americans, no white Asians, no white Hindus, no non-black people are not allowed, of course, as it is with all of our events. So that information, all of that information is there. And the final piece is we also did this is the first time this year, 2018, that we have a fundraiser crowdfunding piece for the conference to cover the expenses, the increased expenses of the venue. Again, it's a free event. And also to help cover the travel expenses for our presenters who will be coming out of state to present at this free conference for the community. So if you would like to support that effort, you can receive one or more of our 29 books in return for your contribution to the crowd fund for the conference. So you'll see that on our AKYISAN page. And we've had a couple of people who have contributed so far. So yet I'll say we thank you for your contributions. But this will assist us in continuing to put out these free conferences. And we want this to be the biggest conference so far, showcasing our ancestral religious practices born of our blood circles here in North America. Hoodoo, Juju, Bodun, and so forth, Wanga, Ingangan, and so forth. So we're going to go to the phone line real quick. We have a few minutes left. We're going to go to the phone line. Michio on the phone line, number 6482. You had a question or comment?
Hetep. I was listening to what you said about how some people, they're so spiritual and even-tempered, but then when they're challenged or dismissed or they are rejected, they flip out, basically. And in my experience, these people who do this are usually some of the most popular people in social media or even, in the tangible physical world. So I was wondering, I have a two-part question, really. I was wondering what you think the appeal is to those, for those kind of people. Why do they have such a huge following? And also what you think is the draw for Pan-Africanism, African-centered education. What draws them to the so-called conscious community, those type of personalities? What's their appeal to other people, and what draws them to us?
Well, now, there's one thing we're going to get into some detail with regard to that nature of these pathologies. So this is what happens. Some people in regular society, everyday life and so forth, they're shunned by, the average individual, their parents, siblings, quote-unquote friends, schoolmates, co-workers, other people with whom they come into contact with, because people see that there's something wrong with this individual. Now, in our ancestral culture, we have remedies for that. When people are emotionally unstable, mentally and emotionally unstable, and they engage in self-destructive or maladaptive behaviors, we have the remedy for that. We did a broadcast, therapist or the rapist, ancestral religion versus psychology. Of course, therapist, when you break it up, it's spelled the rapist. And we talk about the difference between psychology and ancestral religion. Even the term therapy, where you get therapy from, that's a title of a priest or priestess in ancient Kemetic guide and so forth. They even corrupted the title of that. So we have remedies for that. Any form of maladaptive behavior, first and foremost and fundamentally, is some measure of disalignment from the Ka or Ka'at. And when you're disaligned from the divinity that dwells in your head region that regulates order within your spirit body, then you're going to manifest some form of disorder. And the greater the disalignment, the greater the maladaptive behavior. And it manifests in, in Western parlances, schizophrenia or, narcissistic personality disorders or bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 or whatever the diagnosis is. But it's some form of disalignment. And when you're disaligned, you're more receptive to the influences of other people's thought projections, conditionings, suppressed conditionings, embracing conditionings and so forth, suppressing them, holding on to them, but then also discarnate relatives and non-relatives, spiritually disordered spirits that, are deceased who are from your blood circle, as well as those who are not. You're more receptive to that because your spiritual immunity has been weakened. Just like physical immunity is weakened, and then you can get assaulted by viruses that normally you just bounce off of you. If you're strong, people can cough all over you. You can go to sleep with your spouse, and they can cough all over you because they have a virus, and you're just chilling because you're strong. But if your immune system is compromised, then you get assaulted by the same thing. Spiritually, if your immune system is compromised because of disordered behavior, then you're more receptive to these viral entities, whether they're human beings or, the projections from physically from people or spiritually or the conditionings that you've been holding on to and so forth, and that generates what's manifested as behavioral illness or mental illness and so forth. We have remedies for that in ancestral culture. The whites and offspring put forward psychology and psychiatry and everything else. They're doping people up or taking them through silly therapeutic interventions that are not really helpful typically. So those kinds of individuals, quote-unquote misfits and so forth, who are shunned by, the people dominant within their lives, they don't have anywhere to turn typically. Nobody's embracing them. They have abandonment issues. They have attachment issues. They have all kinds of things. But then they can develop this new persona. Social media has given an outlet to people with pathologies, as we said earlier. So now they can develop a new persona. But at some point, their pathology squeaks through, and people kind of pick up on it. Some people pick up on it right away, like, okay, this Negro is crazy, something wrong with this Negro. Some people pick up on it right away. Some people it takes a little bit longer to pick up on. And then they begin to get shunned once again, just like they were in regular life. Now they're getting shunned online. Now they're ready to flip out. But the average person rejects them. So the only people they feel like they can reach out to are people who are involved in some form of ancestral culture. And this is what happens with our people. When we break away from Christianity and Islam and all these foolish ideas and Moorishism and extraterrestrialism and smoking and drinking and all this other nonsense, and we try to get back involved in ancestral culture and get back in harmony with order, and what immediately happens is people begin to transform their entire lives from inside out, up, down, top to bottom, all the way around. So the first thing that people do is they purify themselves. They start operating in a natural way. What they put in their bodies is natural. They purify that. They no longer do drugs or, drink, and they no longer act in a promiscuous way and so forth. They purify their mindset. They, go natural with regard to hair or whatever it is. They transform and reclaim their ancestral names. They begin to engage in ritual practice that affects their children and their spouses or significant others. If they're not yet married, those people they interact with, and then they begin to engage in the nation-building process. But very often, most of our people are not involved in that. So when someone else shows up and says, hey, I'm doing the same thing, some of us are so desperate that to have someone else who's engaged in the same thing. We may be living in areas where there's only 2 or 3 people who are doing this. We're so excited that we're like, hey, brother, hey, sister, we're so glad that you're here, and they're just welcomed with open arms. And the narcissist or the insane individual, they're used to being shunned, so when people are cultural, they're so glad you came to an event, they're so glad you jumped on a group, they're so glad that you, are participating in something cultural, that they just welcome you with open arms, and, the parasite receives all of this quote-unquote love from the cultural community, but the larger community, like, nigga, you crazy, we're not embracing you like that. So they can get into the cultural community because a lot of our people are desperate for membership, quote-unquote, in the cultural community, or desperate for support in what we're doing, because the larger society, black people in the larger society are still in church and, doing all this nonsense. So anybody who supports anything we're doing, we're so excited. Some of us who don't know any better is that we'll just embrace whoever steps up. We're just jumping up and down to embrace them. And on one hand, part of that is good, but we have to be discerning. And when we practice ancestral religion, we can determine right away, sometimes even before they show up. The Unsamaf already told us, this Negro is going to come for the first time, what's going down. And we can reject them before they even say the first word. But if we don't know any better, we accept them. And then they get a foothold in the quote-unquote community, and then they feel like they can begin to exploit, because they weren't able to exploit the larger society because they were rejected, out of hand. They get in our community, and then they, start, showing their roots, showing what's really has been germinating and what has been really rooting, and that poison begins to manifest. And then they begin to be shunned. And let me say, the broadcast is going to end in 90 seconds for those who are listening online. If you want to listen beyond being online, all you need to call in and get on the phone line so you can continue to hear. The phone number is 646-787-8155, 646-787-8155. You have about a minute to call in so you can get on the phone line. We're not going to go too much longer. I just wanted to make that notification. I just got the notification from Blog Talk. But so those people get shunned, but then they begin to be, they start to get shunned, somewhat by people even in the cultural community. They start getting isolated once again, and now they start to panic. So they start moving within the quote-unquote cultural community towards people who are just like them, other fakers in the cultural community, or people who are just broken people, vulnerable people in the quote-unquote cultural community. Some people embrace culture because they want to purify themselves. Some people embrace culture not because they're manipulative, but they were shunned by society. They may have abandonment issues. They find a home in the cultural community, and they know it's a good thing because they want to empower themselves, but they're broken individuals, and they're receptive to anybody who says anything. And they start seeking these broken individuals who have not yet fortified themselves, who just got turned on to culture. They seek out those vulnerable for people who just joined the cultural community or just returned to embracing some aspect of culture, and then their talk and their charisma and so forth draws in some of those broken people who are in a certain, region of the cultural community, and they get a following of broken people. They get a following of broken people who are not yet fully aware. They get a following of other individuals who are fakers just like them, also narcissists and schizophrenic and everything else. And then they start leading that following, and then they become the loudest voices. And people outside the community believe that they represent the community, and they're less than 1/10 of a percentage of the community. Not only that, they're really not part of the community. They've been faking the whole time. So they generate a great deal of, a large following. It appears, from the inside, it appears they generate a large following because they're the loudest. Just like the class clown is the loudest individual in the room, he's the minority. If you have 30 children in the room, the class clown is the minority. But since he's the loudest, everybody's paying attention to him. But the majority of people are really not class clowns. In the same fashion, the loudest people are usually the most ignorant, the most self-destructive, the ones who are seeking attention. And they make the most noise. But then that bleeds out into the larger black society, and it appears that the loudest Negro represents the cultural community. And this is where you get this term where they denigrate the term Hotep and all this other stuff that comes from the whites and offspring, but brainwashed Negroes in the larger society latch onto it because they're self-hating, and they look for an opportunity to express that self-hate, and they can apply Hotep to any crazy Negro who doesn't really represent the community and was really never part of the cultural community in the first place. And that's what takes place. So they appear to have, a large following within, but actually the vast majority of our people are not involved in anything cultural. The vast majority are not. So the following they have is very small. It just looks like it's a large following because they're very loud, and they have more of a, appeal to those broken individuals and other people who keep, following them. So it looks like they have a great deal of influence. But if you step back and look at it in context, the vast majority of our people are not involved in anything cultural anyway. So the vast majority don't even know who these people are, or they may hear of them a little bit later and they immediately dismiss them. And then the people within the cultural community, they know about some of these idiots, and the majority rejects them. So the only thing they have left are people who are just like them, or people who are broken, who have not yet fully fortified themselves, and then they latch on to Negroes like that, and they generate a little following that way. Eventually they get exposed in some fashion. Sometimes it takes months, sometimes it takes years, but they end up melting down or, exposing themselves in some fashion. The stopgap measure, of course, and the institutional approach is to establish our institutions rooted in our firm moral foundations. And this is why we talk about AKYISAN, Ancestral Religious Reversion. This is why we talk about OBARIMA, the purified nation. This is why we have our OBARIMA Afashe, OBARIMA conference. Third annual will be in June, dealing with nationism, purification of nationalism. But then we have our AKYISAN conference in March around the equinox, dealing with reversion, reverting back to our original pristine state, our ancestral religious practices born of our blood circle, so we can align every thought, intention, and action with divine order every moment of every day, so we can purify ourselves on a consistent basis. And when we're purifying ourselves on a consistent basis, and our family, our children, and so forth, when we get to, that's ritually, that's ancestral religion. So then when you get to the OBARIMA piece, the nation-building piece, you have a group of people who have already purified themselves and are consistent with that. And anytime they meet some kind of conflict, they meet it in a nationist, from a nationist perspective. They're going to do it in a harmonious way, even resolving conflict. So you're going to have a group of purified people and purifying people building institutions. That's the remedy institutionally for stamping out these, these frauds, whether they're intellectual frauds, linguists, pseudo-linguists, or pseudo-researchers, or speakers, or, so-called healers or healeresses, or priests or priestesses, or elders or eldresses. They're calling themselves all these titles, and they were never that from the beginning. So that's the long answer to that.
Mirase.
Okay. Yeni I'll say that. We appreciate the call. Okay, Michelle on the phone line, number 8162. You had a question or a comment?
What's up, Brother Kwesi?
What's up?
I'm not sure if I missed your definition because I tuned in a little bit later. I apologize if I'm asking a question that you already answered, but I was wondering if you could define ego. It's like I've seen so many different definitions of it that I actually kind of have written the word off as not even being a real thing, or look at it as kind of a wall or something that people build up in order to protect their insecurities. That's kind of how I look at what an ego is, but I've heard so much stuff about it and never really got a clear definition.
Okay, right. So, and the thing is, you're right, because this is a term, this terminology that, the id, the ego, superego, coming from Freud. So this is something that they manufactured and applied their own definitions to, which we don't want to adhere to those definitions. So when people talk about an ego, it's basically talking about, in a sense, it's talking about your, Akhan, the sum, the spirit, but the conditioned nature of the sum. So you have a spirit body, right? But you can take in things that are intelligent and operate based, and you condition your spirit in that manner. Or you can take in foolish ideas and everything and condition your spirit to embrace foolish ideas, and you have inclinations and desires for self-destructive behavior. And then, that manifests as ego. But when we use our own terms, then we can properly define the, divisions of our spirit body, our spiritual anatomy, and then we can make proper decisions. So we have a sum, a spirit body, and that spirit body is rooted in our su, our essential nature, and then you have subine, and we did a broadcast. So when we're talking about this, when you look at the broadcast on the subine, the character and everything, and the sum, you'll see we did a whole broadcast on this, so I'll just summarize it, but it's better for us to use our own terms. It's the sum and Akan, the sahu and ancient Kemet, spirit body, and you have, which is rooted in the root of the term is su, which is your essential nature, and you have a spirit body around that essential nature. When you engage the kinds of thoughts, intentions, and actions that have been fashioned by Ptah, according to your ka, your soul, your kayat, those kinds of thoughts, intentions, and actions that you consistently embrace condition your spirit in a fashion that's harmonious, and you develop a character that is the kind of character that is always seeking to align with divine order. And the term for character in Akan is su-bain. Su is the essential nature. Abain is a fence or a structure. So su-bain, meaning character, is broken up into su, the essential nature that is surrounded by Abain, a specific fence or a structure. And that structure around your essential nature is your character. If you align with divine order, then the kind of character that you have, that structure around your essential nature, will be a harmonious character. And we say subain power, good character, sacred character. If you embrace self-destructive behavior, disordered behavior, then that subain will be subain bani, which is evil or disordered character. That structure around your essential nature, that abain around your su, that character is self-destructive. So we have a sum, a spirit body. When we align ourselves spiritually with our divine function, we develop a character, a structure around our essential nature that is harmonious. And every tradition has their own titles for that, and Yoruba and Vodun and everything else. Everybody has their own linguistic terms for these same aspects of our spiritual anatomy. So when we're talking about the sum, the sahu, and then we get mechanical, just like you have a physical body, and it has a number of different organs. You have a spirit body, and you have a number of different spirit organs. So when we're talking about the ptah and the heart and the brain and the tongue and so forth and the teeth and lips, the spiritual aspects of those things are the shrines of the deities within your body. So you have the sum, which is the spirit body, the hati, the heart and lung complex, that energy within the chest region that generates that fire and so forth, and that desire to execute what's coming from the brain, the spirit's brain. all those things interplay. So instead of, we use the term ego in the in the title, because people know that someone's being led by a misguided ego or a misguided spiritual conditioning and so forth. People understand that, but we want to get back to our own terms. When we're talking about the heart and the tongue and so forth spiritually in the Shabaka Text, we're talking about these things on our own terms, proper definitions, and how we should move forward.
Okay. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, because usually when I, see people talking about ego, it's never really in a positive sense. It's always, you need to let your ego go and all that stuff. And it seemed like that's something that you need, but at the same time, their definition for it just didn't quite make sense. So that makes a lot of sense. So basically, when it's talked about in a negative sense, this is a fence that's a broken fence that someone has built to, shield whatever insecurities that they have or whatever, something along those lines. Because usually it seems like people that are referenced and it said that they have a big ego or they need to let their ego go or whatever. That part is something that they're exuding to compensate for some insecurity. Kind of like
right.
the two.
Even if they were right, even if they were using the term, even though these are terms that we should use our own terms, but even if they were going to use that English term properly, because the ego is, it's basically the sum, the conditioned manifestation of the spirit. So if it's conditioned properly, then you manifest good character. If it's conditioned improperly, you manifest bad character. What they should say is, they're talking about the ego. They're just talking about the ego. You can have a misguided ego or a properly guided ego. They would make those distinctions. But they're not making those distinctions, because usually when they're talking about ego, they're talking about the misguided ego. So they just say it, or somebody's ego-driven, or they're egotistical, or whatever.
Right.
But again,
right.
The problem is we embrace some terminology from the white and their offspring, and then we seek to utilize it. And if we were precise, we could utilize it and give it. We would have to, use a nuanced explanation of it to properly define it, and add a number of different, adjectives and so forth to properly define these things. Or we could just use our own terms that are fully, vested with, proper identity of different aspects of our spiritual anatomy. That way we, Sum has its own definition. There's no white definition of Sum. Su has its own definition. Subain Pa, Subain Boni, the Ab, the Hati, these different aspects of the spiritual anatomy. These are part of our language that are connected to deities, that are connected to functions in creation. So they have a real definition. It's not just a term that you just throw something. Like our terms are born of the movement of the divinities. So those sound vibrations that make up the different terms in our language. When the whites in our offspring talk about mantras and, sacred sound, all of the words in Afuraitkaitnit languages have mantric value. All of them are born from the movement of the Obosom or Orisha through space. They generate their own set of sound vibrations, and when they operate in certain activities, they generate the configuration of sound vibrations. We replicate that, and those are the names of things, events, circumstances, and so forth. So when we use those terms, we're actually, just by speaking the terms or thinking them, we're attuning to that aspect of creation that we're talking about, and we get informed by that energically even before we know the definition. That's why we can speak to a baby and speak the ancestral language into the ear of the baby or speak their name. You're already recalibrating their spirit to their proper functioning just by that properly constructed set of sound vibrations you're speaking into their ear. You speak English into their ear ritually, you're projecting a discordant group of sound vibrations that doesn't align their organs or their spirit body with anything.
I had one other question if you had time.
Okay, no problem.
I was watching an Odwirafo documentary talking about ancient Egypt and the afterlife and how they thought about it. And they were going into the text, what's in the Duat, and
right.
they mentioned that was like a textbook to describe what you do when you die. I couldn't quite remember if that was what you said that text was about, but other stuff that I've heard about that text makes it seem like to me that it's more about, or it could be used for how we need to maneuver while we're alive, dealing with Odwirafo and other disordered spirits. And, I wondered what that text actually was about.
Yes, so actually you're right, it's both. So the Shaktim Duato, the book of what is in the spirit realm, the quote-unquote underworld or the ancestral realm, we enter the ancestral realm, of course, through the gate of death, quote-unquote, permanently for 100 years or more after we transition, and we remain there, and then we live amongst the ancestral community. If we live in harmony with order, we continue development, and then eventually we are reincarnated through the gate of birth, and we live in the physical world for the next 70, 80, 90 years or whatever. So we do enter the ancestral realm or the duat after we transition, quote-unquote, permanently, meaning for 100 years or more. But we also enter the ancestral realm of the duat on a regular basis, temporarily, throughout the course of our lives. We enter it very often when we're dreaming. We enter it when we engage in ritual practice. We enter it, through basic ritual, even if it's communal ritual, spirit possession, or meditation, or ritual song, ritual dance, ritual prayer, libation, and things like that, divination, or through the dream state, or even sometimes when we're just totally focused internally, we begin to make that, transition periodically, making that sojourn into the ancestral realm. And then we can communicate with the Nsamafo, when we go into the ancestral realm like that ritually, just like we communicate with them when we make our transition. The only difference is we stay there when we make our transition. But when we're, physically alive, when we go to the ancestral shrine and pour libation and evoke the Nsamafo, we're going, making that sojourn into the ancestral realm. Or when a diviner is doing divination for someone, or you engage in meditation, or sometimes people have, out-of-body experiences and so forth, we're foraying into that duat. And the same things that you see in the different divisions of the duat, some spirits are negative and so forth that you have to overcome. You invoke certain Obosom and so forth to defend yourself against them or repel, attune to their energy so you can repel negative entities. It's the same thing here. When you're walking through and operating through the physical world, you're still aligning yourself with those same forces to repel negative entities, including negative people, or to neutralize their projections. So yes, it's a manual for what happens, after transition, but also we're entering the ancestral realm every time we engage in ritual practice during our lifetimes. So that's part of it. And it's also, anytime you're talking about divinity, you're also talking about the physical body and the physical world and so forth, because those are the shrines for the deities. So, for example, we use the example of the book of giving breath, Nehem, to the person in the spirit realm, and they talk about invoking that divinity, Nehem, and giving breath to the lungs and so forth in that particular chapter. Those are also ritual prescriptions. So, for example, we have one sister, some of you all know her. The daughter was dealing with, asthma for a number of years, a young sister. Sometimes ended up in the hospital having to get, these shots and everything else. There was one particular instance where she went into the, emergency room, and they were doing everything they could possibly do. And she'd been in the emergency room before for this in the past, but this time they did everything they could do, and they didn't have anything else. And the sister reached out to the community to, let people know because she was concerned. And then we responded by, recommending that she utilize that ritual text of giving breath to the individual in the spirit realm. And she's involved in ancestral culture because she knows how to invoke the Obosom, and she knows how to engage in ritual practice. But she never used that particular ritual prescription before, but she did that, and then the young girl came out of that asthmatic, emergency, and went on for a very long time without suffering that again. So it helped her come out of that. So these different texts are also ritual prescriptions, medicinal prescriptions, and so forth. They have variegated uses.
For some reason, it's like I feel a draw to read that particular one. I've gotten the Haru, and I've been reading like a chapter here and a chapter there, but I feel a draw to read what's in the doo-wop. I'm not sure why, but it keeps coming back around.
Oh, that's because, I'm sure, of course you should do that, because you're engaging that process, and what you're seeing in the text is, laying out what's going on in the ancestral realm, things you've been confronting, all your life, spiritually. So they're drawing you to that to identify specific things for you. So just like you see Ra as Afura navigating his way through the 12 hours of the night in the underworld and avoiding noxious serpents and, other negativity and so forth, and coming out and being reborn in the, at the sunrise and shedding the flathorn ram form, animal totem, and becoming the hawk or falcon once again and flying through the sky and so forth in the boat of the Aten, the sun, and radiant and beaming. We have to navigate our way through different issues, whether it's negative issues or workspaces or negative issues in life and so forth, or criminals or whatever it is. We have to navigate our way the same way that Ra and Ra'at navigate their way through, all these different quote-unquote traps. And we have the capacity to do that. That book is showing that we've already established institutionally how to overcome any situation. That whole notion in Akan of Shay Wo and Shay, they try to burn you, but you do not burn. We have the capacity, we have the institutional, foundation to overcome any obstacle as shown through the Shak Duat, and they give the prescriptions right there and the divinities to invoke. And they just show that. And sometimes it's just simply a confirmation of what has been going on, and when you look at the text, you can readily identify what's been taking place and find those remedies in there.
Okay. Madasi for answering my questions. It's out.
Okay. Yeni Atera. Appreciate the call. Okay, so we have one more call on the phone line. Michiavo on the phone line, number 2081. You had a question already?
Yeah. Well, actually, I didn't have much questions, but actually one thing that did came to my mind, since you were referring to institution, the institution that you're trying to still establish, how's the status on that? Are you close now to it, besides the movie that you're trying to finish?
Right, so that's what we did was working on the film first, because we had to put that forward, and then once we finish that, then that will be able to launch the institution. We'll get to the point where we can utilize the proceeds from the film to open up the institution. That'll be the easiest way to do it, the most direct way to do it. So we've been focused on that process first. So we have a couple of things going on all at the same time. Next month is the Happy Meadow Retreat in South Carolina, Nagala Island. So, and for people who don't know, we have a couple of spaces left for that. So go to the Happy Meadow page if you would like to attend that retreat. That's coming up in February. The following month in March is the AKYISAN Ancestral Religious Reversion Conference. So those things are set. So we have to, organize for those. But in the midst of that, we're still working on the film piece. If we didn't have those two events coming up, we could be totally focused on the film piece, but those are things that are set in the calendar, so we need to spend time, a great deal of time, organizing for that. So that kind of takes away from some of the other stuff, which includes the film as well as some of the other books that we're working on. For example, the third part of the Akhan Obosom series is next coming out, but we have to shuffle things around. But yes, with the completion of the film, then that'll fund the institution, and then we'll be able to move forward like that. So for those who are unaware, we're working on this film on ancestral religious practices, Amarukafo Adebisa Ajumadi, African American Ancestral Divination Project. So we're talking about the forms of divinations we maintained in our blood circles here in North America in the hoodoo, voodoo, juju, Ngangai, and Wanga traditions. So we'll have a number of different healers as well as myself talking about our divination practices. If you would like to support that work, please do so. We're at about 46% of the funding goal. We actually started last January. So we can get to that, goal. We can finish it within like 30 days. So we need some assistance with that. But, yes, we've been working on those different aspects. But once the film is done, that'll fund the institution, and then we'll be able to roll from there.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to hold much of your time. Other questions I'll have for next time, but thank you. Madase.
Okay. Yeni Asera. We appreciate the call. Okay, so we'll end the broadcast here. Once again, look at the AKYISAN page, Ancestral Religious Reversion. If you would like to receive one or more of our 29 books for your contribution to our crowdfunding effort for the conference, just go to the AKYISAN crowdfunding page. You'll see that link on our website. You'll see the link on our Facebook page. We posted that on the AKYISAN page on Facebook. We have the AKYISAN Ancestral Religious Reversion Conference 3rd Annual Event notification, as well as a page specifically for that. And we've also posted the information for if you'd like to advertise your business, organization, or institution, or study group, or whatever you're doing. You can do that as well. And also the Happy Merit Retreat coming up in South Carolina next month. Again, we have those 2 spaces left. So if you would like to attend that retreat, go to the Happy Merit page. Of course, we're dealing with OBARIMA, Afurakani Manhood, OBAATAN, Afuraitkaitnit Womanhood, based on our books of the same name. I'll be conducting the session with the brothers. Dr. Iya Ajawa, she'll be conducting the session with the sisters on womanhood. We'll also have the joint sessions on Ptah, SASETEM, and other issues. But then at the same time, it's also a vacation. So we'll have the activities on the Saturday and Sunday, February 17th and 18th. People arrive on February 16th, afternoon and evening. We'll have the sessions on Saturday and Sunday, the Minada and Awusida in the morning and early afternoon. And then in the late afternoon, evening, and on both days, people can vacation, explore the Gullah Islands and so forth, and do whatever they want to do. So, again, Yerase, we thank you for tuning into the broadcast. And Yebeshe Abio, we will meet again. That's it.